be registered as a motor caravan on the logbook. The roof needs to be strengthened, but these structural strengthening upgrades are not done by everyone. So there you see a rib bed in chassis crash tested. Just because you see a bed as crash tested being marketed doesn't mean it's actually going to be safe in your vehicle. I will explain why. There are a few aspects to this and they're all really important. You need to hear them all. Crash tested beds can still fail crash tests. How? People will often tell you that they've got an M1 crash tested bed, but what does that actually mean? Well, there are two tests, and the first is a pull test where an accident is simulated with the bed being placed on a metal bench. The seat bed is pulled with an appropriate force to simulate an accident, and it's going to test that structural integrity of the bed to make sure that it doesn't collapse, break, welds come away or anything, to make sure that the bed itself is going to be safe. We certainly don't want it collapsing or breaking on us when we sat on it. Well, that's excellent, because we all drive around on metal benches, don't we? Well, obviously not. We drive around in vehicles, and all these vehicles are different. Some of them are short wheelbase, some of them are long wheelbase. They've got different conversions, they've got different manufacturers, they've got different people who've built them, they've used different parts, they've used different accessories. They've all been built very, very differently. So how are they going to respond like a metal bench? They're not. Now stay with me here, because this is going to sound really silly, but this is a crash tested child seat. It's one of the best which you could get a few years ago when the kids were in it. It's got the advanced side protection, it's got ISOFIX, it's got all the bells and whistles to make sure that it passed those crash tests, which it did. But look at this. Now, obviously, that's just being silly, because it's obviously going to fail. It isn't strapped in properly. But stay with me here, because it isn't fitted properly, and that's pretty much the key. So here we go again. Let's have another go. And again, it has failed. Clearly, it's going to fail because it's still not been installed properly. But on first glance, it looks as though it could potentially be safe. And that's the same with your beds. That wasn't installed using the correct fixings, in this case, which is ISOFIX. So although it's being crash tested, it isn't going to perform very well at all in a crash. I hope you're getting the point so far, but there is a lot more. If it isn't fitted properly, it isn't going to perform. The second type of testing is in-chassis testing, which, as you can see in the video, this isn't being carried out on a metal bench. It's being carried out using a Volkswagen Transporter chassis, an actual chassis from a Volkswagen Transporter, so you can see how it's going to react in the event of an incident. The test is carried out with the forces to simulate that accident, just to see how not only the seat performs, but also the fixings around it, the chassis. How is that vehicle going to hold up? Because the two of them together is extremely important. The companies who are carrying out this in-vehicle crash testing, in this case the Bespoke Northern Ireland, which you've seen before when I've been talking about the Tamar Caravan Centre bespoke vans which they've got, they're spending a lot of money. They've got to buy a vehicle chassis, a Volkswagen Transporter chassis, to ensure that it passes the test. And if it doesn't pass the test, then they've got to get another chassis and test it. So these companies are spending lots of money to make sure that you are going to be safe in these vehicles. These already crash tested seatbeds which have passed the tests can fail these in-chassis tests. Just because the seat retains its structural integrity and doesn't break, it doesn't mean that the person who's actually sat on them is going to be intact. These already crash tested seats can fail crash tests in chassis. Well, how? Well, in the event of an accident, that seat is going to do something with the chassis. The chassis will flex a little bit, but is it going to crumple and is it going to kind of fold on itself and the chassis get ripped apart? Is it going to rip a hole in the chassis and the seat actually come away from the vehicle chassis? That's what the in-vehicle chassis testing is for, to make sure how the two of them in unison perform together. Are the occupants in that seat going to be safe? Because even though that seat has been crash tested, it still could structurally become apart. How? Well, I'll come on to that in a bit. A rib bed is provided from the factory with various different drilling patterns, but it isn't provided with any fitting hardware. The hardware to install these beds does vary drastically, as does the application they're being installed into. like short wheelbase, long wheelbase, the beds themselves are coming 112, 120, 130, 150. Is it a Volkswagen? Is it a Ford? Is it a Mazda? And I'm going to come on to that in a minute. That is quite concerning. The hardware in this crash tested bed is using a steel plate above the floor and also another plate below the floor, and installed using a specific drill pattern. And this has passed the crash tests. But that's not always been the case. So how can these crash tested beds fail? Well, this type of proof converter, as I've said, uses steel plates above and below and also a specific drill pattern. Well, if that steel was slightly different, or those bolts were different, or they were drilled in a different pattern, then it might fail a test. Different materials being used, again, could fail a test. Beds have failed because converters have tried putting in extra bolts into the seat base. They've been designed with specific drill patterns to use. If you're putting extra bolts in there, you're removing the flex which it's been designed to have. If the seat can't actually flex, then you're potentially putting extra strain on those welds. So the seat welds could break. So that previous crash test, where it's past its structural integrity, may well mean nothing because it's not been installed using the correct instructions. Another potential reason for failure is extra holes, extra bolts, extra fixings around that seat base. If somebody's been putting in an air vent around where that seat's going to be fitted, then you're changing the structural integrity of the floor pan. It isn't the same as when it was in chassis tested previously. Extra holes for maybe some extra furniture or a heater or whatever it might be, holes in the chassis is going to change that structure of it. And there's also a difference between a short wheelbase and a long wheelbase. You've got an extra 40 centimeters of metal floor on a long wheelbase, so it's potentially going to be changing how it responds. And one of the big aspects for me is people are putting these in other vehicles. So it might be the Mazda Bongo, the Bedford Rascal, the Fiat Talento. Well, those chassis are completely different than the Volkswagen Transporter. So as somebody in vehicle tested how the floor responds on one of those vehicles, because they're totally different to a Volkswagen Transporter. And even more concerning, which frightened me when I found out that it hadn't been in vehicle testing, is the beds inside the ID Buzz camper. You've actually got batteries, a battery pack underneath the floor of an ID Buzz. Now, putting a bed in that, how's that bed going to react with the chassis with the batteries underneath it? We don't know. It might be safe, but without it being tested, I certainly wouldn't want to be getting in it. In-vehicle testing is the only true way of knowing whether it's actually going to be safe, and really, more importantly, the people who are sat on that seat. Ask the right questions of your converter to make sure that it has been fitted correctly. Has the bed's manufacturer's instructions been followed to the letter? Some converters can't even install a gas hob according to the manufacturer's instructions, let alone a bed, which is quite concerning as far as I'm concerned. NCC approved converters have to go through this rigorous testing. They are fully compliant with electric, gas and health and safety regulations. The campervan conversion industry isn't regulated, but the NCC approval is the closest thing to it. NCC approved vans like these can apply for whole vehicle type approval and be registered as a motor caravan on the logbook. Additional testing is also required for the front seats, and they have upgraded seatbelt anchorage points to make sure that they're going to pass the test for the required M1. A further strengthening adaptation to these tested vans, and that is on the roof. The roof needs to be strengthened to make sure that when you've got that great big hole in it, that it's still going to be rigid enough. That big hole does make a significant structural change to the vehicle. But these structural strengthening upgrades are not done by everyone. Now, we've seen our Belle, our Beauty, as if you recognise it from Beauty and the Beast, was being chucked around in the back with that unsecured car seat. We need to make sure that everything which we're putting in our vehicle is going to be safe as it possibly can. The Motorhome and Caravan Show is going to be on at the NEC in Birmingham from the 17th to the 22nd of October. And a lot of these type approved, NCC approved converters with the high safety standard of vans are going to be there. Check them out. You will see the plaques on the side to show that the vehicle you're looking at is NCC approved. So it's got that higher safety standard, which is a really good thing to be looking for. They won't be lowered to the floor with the big 20-inch alloys and the body kits, but they will be extremely well built and safe. What's more important to you? If you haven't seen the first video when I talked about these high quality vans, you can have a look at that here. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you soon.